right. Well, thanks for joining us today. Today we're talking about business planning, and as always, this podcast, this show is about legacy planning and estate planning and planning for the future. A lot of times when we talk about planning, we overlook the little things that we think, well, that's not really legal. It's not necessary to have documents for, but it is important, right? And so today, when we talk about business planning, we're going to talk about the idea of, some of those intangible directions and instructions that you should be leaving for your business, for your key employees, and for those that are going to carry on after you if something were to happen, whether it's death or disability or some sort of emergency, and how to address some of those things as part of your overall business succession plan. I was sitting through a meeting that the Bar Association does for attorneys every year, and it's a training sort of meeting where they talk about some of the things that as an attorney we need to consider for our businesses. And this particular meeting was in regards to business succession planning. And while a lot of it was very general information, one of the things that I really got out of this was the statistic that, in the attorneys, field in our space, there's a lot of older professionals that are dying off. And so they actually said that, in Vegas, in Nevada, there are close to, it's as big as a football field. It would fill an entire football field worth of bankers boxes with cases that attorneys that have passed away have left behind, and with nobody to handle or nobody to hand them off to. They don't have enough resources to reassign those cases fast enough so that the people who are depending on representation can have proper representation for their cases. And this has been an ongoing problem for the last couple years. And the reason is because so many professionals have passed away in the last few years. And so it's just crazy to think about. But we've actually seen the situation where a client was in the middle of their case working with an attorney. The attorney passed away, and then it was a solo practitioner. There was nobody there to be able to step in and handle the case. They tried to call the family to get information on their case so that they can work with a different attorney. And the family didn't even know how to get access to the files on the computer and everything else that were left behind by the attorney. And so it can become a very big problem. And this is not just for attorneys. This is also for other professions, right? I have a friend of mine who's a doctor. They have a private practice. They told me about a colleague of theirs that passed away. And when he passed away, all of the medical records and everything were all on his own internal system, and nobody knew the access to the server. And so they had to go and basically recreate probably about 3 years worth of medical records that they couldn't recover from his files. They had to go back and recreate it, and they said it was like a 6 months job for the hospital and the medical facility there to be able to go back and recreate and take care of all these patients that needed updated medical records. It's a huge mess, right? And it can happen with any industry because you have client lists, you have vendors, you have payments out and everything that somebody's going to need to coordinate. And we call it institutional knowledge, right? When somebody who has that institutional knowledge is no longer part of the business, it can create a big gap and a big problem that needs to be addressed. I remember working early on in my career, working for a real estate litigation firm, and we had a paralegal who was amazing. She ran the entire office, right? And one day she decided to move on. She took another position somewhere else, and it was like one day to the next. There was a little bit of falling out with the partners because they didn't expect that she would do that to them. But basically 1 week she was there. She had like 2 days of preparation. She tried to leave things ready for her going to another job, and then the next week she was gone. And I can't tell you how much of disruption it was for the office. And it wasn't because of what she was doing. We had people who could do the same tasks, but it was because of what she knew and how everything was organized and where all the information was stored, everything, all that institutional knowledge was lost. And it took a good year to get back to where we were as a company. Because of that key employee disappearing on us, right? And so and again, it can happen to any kind of business. So one of the things that you always want to keep in mind as you're doing business succession planning, and sometimes the planning is for the business owners, and sometimes the planning is for key individuals within the business. And sometimes, it's something that can be planned for. That's, there's transition times, and somebody, hopefully, when they take another position somewhere where they move to another state or something, that hopefully you can plan around for them to be able to stay involved for a little bit of time and to transition things over to a new person. But sometimes it can't be planned for. Sometimes, there's a car accident and somebody's, all of a sudden they're in the hospital and they can't communicate, right? They can't really come in to help with the transition in those moments, right? What if they pass away? Even worse, right? And so, there are types of things that you can put into place, like we've talked about in the past, related to your business succession plan, to make sure that you have insurance. There's even insurance that you can put for disruptions in the business that is not necessarily just to replace the individual, but to account for the lost profitability that you would have had if that individual didn't have their accident or didn't pass away or whatnot, right? And those are some of the things to consider as well. But the other thing to consider is how well are you documenting your processes, your systems, the information for your clients or vendors or for transactions. How well are you documenting it to where it can be handed off to another individual to be able to run things in your absence or in a key person within your company, your organization, within their absence? And part of that process is, looking at, okay, well, what is the critical information that would need to transfer? How are we storing it? Who has access to that information? And how are we leaving that access, or how are we leaving the information to be able to be accessed in the case of an emergency situation? In the case of the legal industry, they make recommendations that you always have an attorney that you can assign to be able to take your cases if something were to happen to you. Well, it's the same thing with any company, right? If there were something that were to happen to a key staff person or a key, one of the business owners, who are the vendors that need to be paid, right? Who are the clients that need to be served? Maybe there's orders that haven't been fulfilled. And is that in a system somewhere that somebody could look up? If it is, how do they get access to that system? And there are various tools that we use as part of planning to make sure that accounts and passwords and access to those sort of things can be left behind properly as part of your plan. There are also just simple measures that you could take that within the company to say, okay, well, here's where the ledger is at, or here's where the emergency logins and access can be found in the case of somebody needing to be able to get into an account for those purposes. There may also be a need to sit down with your key staff members and have maybe a quarterly meeting or an annual meeting, and to just kind of as an exercise think, okay, Bob, you're gone. You had an emergency come up, you're in the hospital, or you passed away, and ask everybody else in the room, how do we do Bob's job? How do we have, what plans, what contingencies do we have in place to be able to address the gaping hole that's going to be there when Bob's not available, right? And how do we know what needs to be handed off? And then what processes can we put in place so that in the case of that emergency, it doesn't take us 4 months or 6 months or 10 months to be able to get a hold of what we need to be able to restabilize as a company. One of the things that we see, not often, but not infrequently either, is companies that are at a very, strong position. They're doing well. Their position maybe for an exit. They're looking at potential buyers and that sort of thing for their company. And then all of a sudden, an emergency comes up, and often it's not the owners themselves. It's a key person within the organization. And then because you take them out of the mix, there's no continuity for the value that the company had just days before. And so the company might be worth, millions of dollars today, but without a key person being there, then the company needs to restabilize before it's worth that amount. Does that make sense? And so it's very important to have this transition of institutional knowledge, the transition of, the information and access for the the information that needs to be transferred, and to a great extent, combining that with your business succession planning documents. Sometimes the access for these types of accounts or types of resources should be done through, like, let's say, a financial power of attorney. But you don't want to give financial power of attorney, just blanket power of attorney, to somebody within your organization for all of your personal affairs. So we can limit your power of attorney that you would leave for business specifically just to the business accounts, or just to your client list, or just to the assets of your business operations. And sometimes people think, well, it's just easiest for me to leave everything to my wife when I pass away, including my businesses. Well, but if you have business partners, maybe you don't want your wife to get involved in the business, or your husband. Maybe you don't want your kids to get involved in the business, or the trustee, that whoever you've named as the trustee. Maybe they're perfect to take care of the family, but they're not perfect to take care of the business. So these are some of the things that you think about when you do your business succession plan, to say, we want the right person in the room when these situations happen. We want to empower them to be able to get access to the information, the institutional knowledge, the resources that they need to do their job. And to the extent that the organization, the company, is going to be affected anyway by the loss of a key person, then maybe we want to protect against that with insurance, or with some coverage that would provide the company with liquidity and with resources at that moment, be able to you without loss of value, or without being able to, without having to stop everything, right, and kind of regroup. So one of the things that we've been having many conversations with business owners recently is, as part of their benefits offering to their key personnel, in order to keep them as part of the organization long term, or to be able to incentivize them to kind of stay as part of the company, we build in some of these protections in the form of insurance, in the form of legal documents, and in the form of just making sure that the company's protected in case something were to happen. And it's a way to really just let them know, look, you are critical to our operations here. That's why we're investing in you, and that's why we have these contingency plans, just in case something were to go under. I mean, employees, especially key employees, they're staking their futures on the success of the business too. And as a business owner, if something were to happen to you and the business goes down, that's something that affects their livelihood. It affects their peace of mind. So having a proper plan, I think, is good for everybody, and all around. And like I said, having those regular discussions can be valuable for an organization. So we encourage you to, if you're a business owner and if you're thinking about planning, start having some of these conversations. Meet with a professional. Talk about some of the ways that you can address the need for succession planning, regardless of what your profession or your type of industry is. And then, start taking measures to put things in place to address those things. So, as always, we invite you to listen to these recordings on our wherever you get your podcasts. We also have them on YouTube, and we will be getting back together next week to talk a little bit more about asset protection planning, and just making sure that you're protected in the case of potential liability. So thanks again for joining us today. We're not going to open it up for questions today. I have another appointment I have to run to, but thanks again for joining, and we'll look forward to talking to you all soon.